I'm Mark Krayenhoff van der Leur, and I design clothes. Like this jacket. Or this jacket. I haven't always designed clothes, however. Here's how it came about. I'm Canadian. I grew up on the West Coast. I studied architecture in university. I worked at it for a total of 30 years. I liked it. It was a good job for me. In the 1990s, I was living in Toronto. That's where I met my husband, the artist AA Bronson. At the end of the 90s, we moved to New York City together and stayed there for a total of 15 years. 8 years ago, we were innocently living our lives in New York when one day my husband got a letter from the German government offering him a 1-year residency in Berlin. Of course he said yes. We arrived in Berlin on Valentine's Day 2013. Of course I was thrilled to have a year off of work. Who wouldn't? But I didn't want to simply fritter away my time. I'd always loved clothing and fashion design, so I thought maybe I'd try my hand at designing clothes. But at the first I had only a few very vague notions and had no idea whether they would ever amount to anything. So we got me a very basic sewing machine and I set to work. And by the end of the first year, we had decided not to return to our lives in New York, but to stay on in Berlin. So 7 years later, I'm still sewing, and I've got tons of ideas, way more than I can make. I'm almost completely self-taught. I haven't taken any kind of sewing or tailoring lessons. I just come up with ideas and then I have to figure out how to make them. Although I did go onto YouTube once to see a tutorial about handmade buttonholes. My machine can technically make buttonholes. They're really so primitive that I decided I should learn how to do them myself by hand. Most of my designs have a conceptual basis, starting from the most basic problem, namely, how do you take a flat piece of cloth and make it into a three-dimensional sculptural garment to fit the human body? If you look over the course of human history, you can see that there have been many ways to solve this problem. In our society, we've come up with a number of solutions. Take, for example, a standard men's shirt. Here are the sleeves, and here's the collar and the body. I recognize that there's a lot of wisdom and experience reflected in this pattern. However, I always want to try something different. So here are 3 very different shirts that explore that idea. I call this one the contour shirt because the concept is like a contour map where you slice the mountains into horizontal slices. And in the same way, this shirt is cut into horizontal slices, and that's how it's made. Starting here, this is the yoke, and it forms a series of stacking C shapes that go all the way around the body. Because of the way the geometry works, you can see that the arms of the C shapes are at all different angles. You can see how the stripes are all vertical across the back, but as the C shapes go around to the front, the stripes end up at different angles. And I made a matching tie to go with it. Back to the standard shirt pattern, you can see how the pattern is shaped to fit the body. The sleeves are wider at the shoulder and taper down to the cuff. And there's a bit of shaping at the waist too. So I wanted to find a different approach to achieving this shaping. For this next shirt, I made the sleeves into cylinders, the same diameter all the way down. And the body is now 1 piece instead of 3, another cylinder with the same diameter all the way down. So with my cylindrical sleeve, I dampened the fabric and then put wrinkles in it, more wrinkles down towards the cuff until it had the same shape as a standard sleeve. Then I ironed the wrinkles flat and sewed them all into place with hand stitching. Fluorescent orange is my new favorite color. And in a similar way around the body, it doesn't require as much shaping as the cuff, so there's fewer wrinkles, but it's the same concept. And here's the third one. It's made of 98 unique rectangles using 9 types of blue shirting material. Here it is under construction. The rectangles form this strange poncho shape, which is subsequently wrapped around the body to make the shirt. You can see it's all horizontal and vertical on the back, but as it goes around the arms and towards the front, it ends up at all different angles. And the interstices between are filled with semi-transparent fabric. And here are two shirts that look very different, but are actually generated from the same concept. I was chatting with my assistant Russell one day, and he said, "Mark, could you make a shirt out of one piece of fabric?" And I said, "Sure," although I had no idea how. But I thought about it, and I came up with these two different designs. This shirt is made as a continuous spiral that starts at one cuff and spirals around the arm and over to the back, and then reverses direction back down to the other cuff. Here's the pattern. You can see how it loops around. It's made of striped fabric, and I like that even though it's a continuous piece, the stripes end up at all angles as it twists around the body. I told you that I have no formal training. My very basic sewing machine can sew knit fabric, but the result is really not satisfactory. So I decided to make virtue of necessity and develop this hand-stitching style. The concept for this one is as if you had taken a standard shirt and made cuts in it until it would eventually lay flat, and therefore could be made out of one piece of fabric. Here's the pattern. I call it the almost one-piece shirt because the collar is separate. I'm working on an idea for that, but also because the pattern is big and was wider than the fabric. The fabric is 150 centimeters wide, about 5 feet, which is here on the pattern. So I had to sew extensions onto the front shirt tails. You can see how all the seams come together. I chose voile, which is a bit transparent, because this shows the seam pattern more clearly. It's all one piece, including the cuffs. Here's the back tails. I started at the selvage. You can see the little fringe. And here's where I attached the extensions onto the front. So that gives you an idea of how I came to design clothes and some of the things I've made. My designs are very structured and very tectonic, obviously the work of an architect.